Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I look at Flair's baseball card set Flair from 1993 through 1996. Flair was Flair's entry into the ultra premium brands. Ultra premium was the third phase of cards, where in 1989 you had this big explosion of different brands. 1991 you had a launch of premium brands where pretty much everybody made a higher end card, and then in 1993 the big card brands all made an ultra premium brand, which was the next step up. And Upper Deck created its SP set, which was a really fancy kind of kitsch card in a way, kitsch in a good way. You had Topps, which made Finest, which was a very technically advanced card, and you had Score, which made Select, which was supposed to be a really elegant card. It was supposed to be very almost simplistic in a way, and yet it had kind of a complex design to it. And along with this, Flair created a card set called Flair, F-L-A-I-R. And this card was, it took what Score was trying to do, but it took it to a whole nother level. It used a thick card stock, very similar to what Playoff had been using in football, and it made a highly lacquered card surface with a very elegant card design. Just focusing in on the picture, there's almost nothing else. There's some gold foil for a really cool Flair logo up on the top, and then the name is a really fancy script down the bottom, also in gold foil. But it's really the picture in the middle, or the two pictures, where they have a good picture. Most of these cards have really good pictures. They have a good picture of an action shot of the player, and then in the background they have kind of a almost ghosted in close-up shot of the player kind of floating behind, and the two images really don't run into each other. They work very well as a complement. So it was a very well designed card because it was all built on the simplicity of just making a really elegant card. And the highly lacquered surface was a big portion of why this card read so well. And on the card back, they used one shot of the player, and they ghosted in a box around the statistics, so you can actually read the statistics. And then the card number is a similar script to what had been used in Playoff. So there was a lot of inspiration from Playoff designed into this card. But still, they did use that number, but they did use a gold foil for it. So that actually helps. It makes it a little bit easier to read the card numbers. And then they also have some gold foil further down the card, not a lot, but just a little bit, kind of like accents. And that was it. That was the design of the card, but that was also the set. It was really interesting because in the set, they didn't bother with subsets. They just said, yep, these are the players, and that was all they did, with the exception of 3 checklists. Now, Flair had already been using special checklists in Ultra where they had images from their cards in the set. And they did that again here with Flair, where the 3 checklists used the card front of one player and then the back of a card from another player. So the front of the checklist and the back of the checklist has a card front from one player and a card back from the other. And it's a really cool trick that they played. So the players that they have on these are Bo Jackson and Greg Maddux. They have Rafael Palmeiro and Barry Larkin on the second checklist. And on the third one, they have Chris Hoiles and Roberto Alomar. But like I said, that was the whole set. And they did only one insert set too, so this was very simple. And the insert set they had was their Wave of the Future. This is a set that was a standard bearer for Flair for over the years. This is a 20 card set, and it's very simplistic. It's got an image of a wave behind the player, an interesting wave logo in gold foil, and then the players in front of the wave, and then on the back they have a horizontal card back with another wave with another shot of the player, and that's it. That's all they did. Again, for the whole thing. But this card set was not intended to be really flashy and have lots of accoutrements. This card set was supposed to be the card set. That was the whole point. It was, if you're going to get a great card, this is the one. And other companies did this, but this company really leaned in. Flair really put all of their emphasis into it. And on top of that, they made sure that when you were in the card store, it stood out. This is the pack for this brand. They had a normal 36 count box, but inside they had 36 little boxes like this, everyone with a gold foil on top, black on the bottom. And when you open it up, you slide the top open, inside was a pouch that had a cello pack of the cards in it. And so when you went into the store, this was the way that all these cards looked. They stood out so well. And it just made it really enunciated what they were doing. And it was a very successful move they made. They made great cards, and it earned them the right to make a second set. Now, the 93 set was baseball only. They didn't bother with any other sports. In 94, they did expand out to basketball and halfway into football. But for 94, they had earned the right to start to expand this out, and they went about it with pretty much the same card. Not identical, but very similar. These cards also have the two images, but here they didn't really do a lot of blending between them, and they didn't work as hard on selecting the images. So these images tend to run together. And then down at the bottom where they have the gold foil for the name, they also have the first letter of the last name within this gold shield, which is a big distraction. So the whole card doesn't have any elegance. I mean, it has no elegance. It just doesn't read very well. And then on the card back, they got rid of the ghosting behind the stat box, but also, even worse, the number itself was always difficult to read. That was a problem with playoff, and it wasn't a problem with the previous year because of the fact that it had the gold foil, so you could still kind of see it. But here, they used white text with kind of a black shadow behind it, and it just disappears in the cards. In most cases, it disappears, and so that's a problem because it really is difficult to read these card numbers. So unfortunately, with this set, this was supposed to be a continuation of something that was great, but what was done before was a meticulously crafted set. This was not, and it just didn't work very well. The set also did not have any subsets. They continued to ride the same way that they had before. They did do 2 series, so that was a benefit. So they had a lot of rookies showing up in the second series, but they still had the checklist, but this time instead of 3 checklists, it was 2 and 2. So 2 first series checklists, 2 second series checklists. In this case, the checklists have the card back of each player. So the regular cards have a horizontal card back, so all the checklists are horizontal in this case. And the players whose card backs were used on the checklist were Greg Maddux and Joe Girardi, Willie Banks and Ryan Kelso. And then in Series 2, we had Shane Reynolds and Robin Ventura, and then Greg Vaughn and Mickey Tettleton. But they did do a fair number of inserts this year, and that was a good thing. And part of it was the fact they had 2 series. So they start off with Hot Gloves, and Hot Gloves is something they like to do with these Flair cards. Because they're thick, they could get away with doing die cutting real easily. So the Hot Gloves are die cut around the pattern of the backdrop of a glove behind the player. It's actually pretty cool. It's an interesting design, works pretty well, it's pretty flashy. On the back, it looks okay, but the die cutting, even though it's not really inspirational, it's fun. That's really the key to this insert set. So that was pretty cool. Then they did their hot numbers, and this was another one of the mainstay insert sets of Flair. This was something they did across everything, and here, the 94 set here, this was the first time they did it, and boy, did they start off well. I love these cards. They used etched foil on the cardstock. They also used very subdued colors. So in football, when they would do their inserts for 94, everything was super bright. Well, here is the exact opposite. This is super subdued, so that means that the colors are almost sneaky in a way. And the way that the light glistens off in these little fractal boxes is kind of the way to describe it. It makes a really interesting card. It's got an interesting liveliness to it that you just kind of want to settle in and explore. So I love how these hot number cards worked. Then they did a set of 2 sets that were infield power and outfield power. So basically we're looking at the hitters who play in the infield versus the hitters that play in the outfield. And these 2 cards are basically the same except for the fact that the infield cards are horizontal and then the outfield cards are vertical. Other than that, it's basically the same design. And here's what's interesting. All these insert sets are 10 cards, including infield and outfield. But when you flip the cards over, the card backs are identical. And that's the trick. You have to look at the gold foil up in the top left corner and see whether it says infield or outfield. Otherwise, the card looks the same, and the card numbers are X out of 10, identical. There is no difference between them. So you actually have to go and do some research to find out which one. And the research you got to do is basically flip the card over and see which orientation it is. But it can throw you off. These are not parallels. They're separate sets, 20 different players, but you can't really tell from the card back. And their Wave of the Future cards are done pretty much identically. Now, granted, on the card back, it's a lot easier to read, but the Series 1 Wave of the Future cards, those 10 cards, are all horizontal, and they have a really bright background behind the player. And then the Series 2 cards are not, they're vertical, and they're not as flashy. So half of the set is horizontal, half of it is vertical, but they're all numbered 1 through 10. 20 different players, but all numbered 1 through 10. So again, you got to pay attention to that. In 1995, they continued with making their 2 series of cards. This time they still did no subsets, but they didn't do anything special with the checklist. So the checklists were just normal checklists, but the cards in the set, they needed to really dress these up. So the first thing they did was they turned them horizontal, and that was a really good thing they did, because it meant that you could still have the two pictures, but now they're next to each other, so they're not getting in each other's way. They're still not all that dynamic and interesting, but it does work a lot better. The way that the real estate is used is better. But the big thing about these cards is the whole background has kind of a textured quality to it, a visually textured quality, where it has kind of a mottled surface so that you have a sparkly quality. The whole card is just lively in that way. And it's kind of weird because you look at it and you know it's just a pitted surface, but when you touch it, they have so much lacquer over the surface, it's totally smooth, so it feels weird. But the card does have that liveliness, so the card is a lot of fun. You can't really see the player too much, but it is a very dynamic card. And then down at the bottom, it has the player's name in, so the background is kind of a silver quality, and then the player's name is in gold text with silver text for the initials of the player. And then on the card back, this time it's vertical. It's still a little bit difficult to read. Well, it's a lot difficult to read the stats, but you'll notice that they have gold foil on the back. And the reason I specify that is because right now you're looking at an AL player, an American League player. The whole set, Series 1 and Series 2, were both built with American League in the first half of the set, of each set, and then National League in the second half. And the National League, they flipped these around to where the background has a gold treatment to it, and then all of the silver foil has turned to gold, and all the gold foil has turned to silver. So they did an inverse between the American League and the National League. And when you look at all the cards in Series 1 and Series 2, they both ripple this exact same effect. So all the AL cards have a silver finish with gold text, and then all the National League cards have a gold finish with silver text. And again, they did nothing with the checklist, but with the inserts, the first insert is hot gloves again. This time they did not do die cutting, but instead they did embossing. So the glove is embossed on this, I guess it's a bronze foil over the whole card back, but it's an interesting idea that they tried. I like that they tried it. I don't like how it came out, but you know, at least they did give it a shot. So that is good. For the hot numbers, it's actually a good hot numbers card. I have to acknowledge that. The problem is, following the 94 set, this is a huge step down, so it seems a little cluttered, a little disorganized, kind of part of the problem with it, but it's still a good hot number set. It's just not what it could have been. And again, they did the infield and outfield power. So here in 1995, they used a vertical orientation of the card on the card front, and on the card back, they use a horizontal. And the infield power is it uses a circular pattern, and then the outfield power uses kind of a radial pattern. So that's kind of the difference between them. And on the card back, these are both numbered 1 out of 10, so there's no differentiation, except you can see the circular versus the radial patterns. But also they kind of flipped the orientation of the card backs around, so that also helps out a little bit in allowing you to see which set goes with which set. But still, it can be a little bit confusing. And then they did a card set for Cal Ripken Jr. So this was when Cal Ripken Jr. broke the consecutive game mark. And so a couple of sets were doing this, and Flair was no different. They did a set of Cal Ripken Jr. cards. These are very uninspired cards. They just have some simple foil on the front. It's not much to talk about. But they did also have a Rapper Redemption, and they also did a Today's Spotlight set. And this is looking at young players who are rising up into becoming stars. And in this case, they have a spotlight right in the middle where everything's fully bright, and then outside of the spotlight, they have it's darker. But the big thing about this is it is die cut, and the die cutting goes around the spotlight and all that. So that's kind of the interest of the card. It's not a great card, but it's kind of a fun card. So I give them props for that. And then with Wave of the Future, this is actually a really nice card, I think. They have a nice logo that they go with it, but instead of doing actually something with waves proper, which is what we were used to, here they have a really subdued background, and they do have a wavy nature to how it's lit in the background, but they have some text in there, but it is all very calm, and it's a very elegant card, so I like that. And on the card back, it's horizontal, so it again reads really well. For 1996, they decided to continue with what they'd done in 1995, except orient the cards vertically. So now all the cards were vertical, but they also went with only a single series. So they weren't splitting it anymore. Again, they weren't doing anything special with the checklist. But these cards, they're kind of a combination of 1993 and 1995. They use the same card treatment as the 95, but they do the background, or they do the two images in the 93 fashion, which actually looks pretty good. And down at the bottom, they just have the simple gold foil name, which again is a good advantage that they do. And they have a silver treatment of the card with the gold text, but these cards also come in pretty much the same amount with a gold treatment with the silver text down below. So it's two parallel sets. And what's interesting is that these two sets are pretty much about just as common. So it's two completely different sets of the same thing, kind of like hobby and retail. And on the card back, again, the stats are a little bit difficult to read. It's nice that they have it horizontal, but they took the bad numbers that they'd been using all these years and they made them worse. That here it's bright red, which means now you can't read it with anything in behind. So it's amazing how consistent Flair was with just having terrible card numbers. For the inserts, though, they only had 4 inserts because they only had one series, and so it was very straightforward. And the hot gloves went back to the die cut approach around the glove. Here, at least the glove itself, it has a textured surface, which makes it gives it a lot more interest. Now, things do get kind of cluttered, so it's difficult to see the player in it, but it's more ambitious, and there's something really neat about this, and so that's really cool. And when you hold it, you can actually kind of feel the leather approach to the card surface. But it's the Diamond Skills, which is the really interesting card in this, of all these insert sets. It's not a great card set. The card design itself is actually, it's really boring, but it's fascinating in what for me is kind of a morbid curiosity. So basically it has a silver hollow foil designed for treatment for the whole background. But then there is the whole surface over it has kind of, it's almost like little air bubbles in it. It looks like it's not finished well, which is what makes it look really kind of cheesy. But down below there is, within all of this, the Flair 1996 logo in it, floating inside. And there's almost a 3D quality to the way the card is, and it's fascinating to look at. So every time I look at this card, I look at it and go, oh yeah, huh. And I just stare at it and stare at it. It's got that quality to it. So I don't know how to describe it, because it's fascinating, but not in a great way. But at least it's not as bad as Powerline. With Powerline, at this point, Flair had gotten a relationship with Marvel. And with that concept of Marvel, you were starting to see some of the comic book concepts come into cards. And in this case, they have basically like a 3D grid that they put over the player in a way, and then they have this atomic waste green glow to it, and it's just weird. And that's all there is to say about it. It's just weird. So yeah, not a fan. The Wave of the Future cards, however, these are really good. And the reason is because they're lenticular, which is a really fun thing. So a lenticular card structure is, you have these little plastic facets, and they give you the ability to have kind of a 3D quality, or a sequence of images. And in this case, they used it for 3D. Now, don't look at this for acuity. If you want to know what the player looks like, look on the back. On the front, they did not do a very good job with the detail, which sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. In this case, they didn't. But the whole point is, what kind of a wave are they going with? And this time, they're going kind of with sound waves and shock waves. Some stuff in there, but there's a really good 3D quality to 3D space within this card. And then the effects that they have going on in the card back are really cool. So it is actually a very successful card, and I really like how these cards came out. So that was really good. But that's it for Flair. So that was 1993 through 1996. That was the whole run. And at this point, they really didn't have any place to go. They were trying to use the same model, but it had been so long, it was time to restructure it. And they would do that in 1997 with getting really heavy into parallels. So that's a whole nother story. I'll talk about that later. But this is the run of the first 4 years of Flair in baseball. And you can see how they were playing around, how they were evolving, and some really cool inserts and some not so cool inserts. So that's the whole story. I hope that you learned something, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Check out my other videos. And yeah, thank you very much for watching.